What's going on, you vermin of the night? You want to talk about fantasy weapons? That's why you clicked on this, didn't you? Or maybe it's just because it's Saturday and you're lonely, you don't have a date, and you just need something to distract you, huh? Huh? Okay, all kidding aside. Well, there will still be kidding, but no kidding. But we'll take a look at something that I just randomly stumbled upon. I found interesting to talk about. And that is this. Everything you need to know about writing fantasy weapons. And it's got a lot of info there. And we're going to take a look and talk about it, shall we? So, we just put this over here. There we go. All right. So, talks about some general rules, some things to keep in mind when writing fantasy. And says, fantasy weapons have personalities. Talks about how people personify things. Everybody always anthropomorphizes everything. It's just all the memes of inanimate objects talking and doing things, and it's what people do. They personify everything. It doesn't have to be Wilson, but there's plenty of cases where people just relate to something by making it seem human. It doesn't have to be like a talking sword, even though those have their own appeal. Certain weapons with personality. But personality can mean just being unique and suiting the personality of the user, things like that. Now, how you do that, there is a wide variety of different options. Sometimes the way they interact can create a certain effect. Like, for example, you can have like a shoddy looking rusty old sword that normally you'd be like, yeah, this is garbage, get this out of here, junk, character needs to upgrade. But if there's a story behind it, like, this is that character's, great grandfather's sword who used it to vanquish this and that demon, or he fought on this and that battle, and there's still certain nicks from particular feats of heroic combat and whatever. Or maybe it's a hero fallen from grace. It's like used to be a renowned knight, or this maybe even a duke or something like that, and then something happened, something tragic in that character's life, and they're reduced to basically a beggar in the street, but they still retain a sword, and they can't even afford to maintain it anymore. And, stuff like that, can be creative with that. The rules of combat, I definitely have to agree with that, because it says here skill beats strength, which is generally true, at least if the difference is great enough. I mean, if there are two people who aren't dramatically different in skill, like one is a little more skilled than the other, but the other is substantially stronger, then the strength can still, be an advantage. But, it depends on how much more. If one is completely unskilled, the other is very skilled, and the unskilled fighter has a lot of strength, then it's probably not going to end too well for them. So in general, it's more satisfying for reader / viewer / etc. Let's see, the Great Lemon asks something. What do you think will win? Guy with sword and body body. Yes, sword with sword and body armor, only protecting the chest, or a guy with a handgun. Both are equal in fitness, and it's in a house. They're 10 to 20 feet away. I'm assuming you mean body armor that actually protects against gunfire, because otherwise that wouldn't make as much sense. So in that case, 10 to 20 feet. Yeah, I'd have to bet on the one with the sword. The thing is, both could die potentially, or at least the The person with the sword could very well die anyway, or be injured. Let's put it that way. But I don't think the guy with the gun has a chance to emerge unscathed. The distance is too short, and you'd have to completely incapacitate the attacker with a sword to get away with that. But you know, if the sword guy just rushes in and just frantically stabs the other guy or hacks away at him, even if he gets shot once or twice, you know, if it's not a headshot, which is unlikely because that's very difficult, then yeah, it's probably not going to end too well for the gun guy in that case. My weapon 2-to-5 H/B ratio with interchangeable pommel. Okay. All right, fine. Let's get back to topic. I love this one. Stealth becomes much less effective when detected. It's like things become a lot less dry when raining. It's like, no shit, Sherlock. That's pretty funny. Okay, what's it say here? Deadly thrown blades that appear almost silently, but often you see a hero swipe them out of the air or dive to recover after spotting the ninja's approach. I mean, yeah, it's not that terribly difficult to evade a thrown weapon because it just doesn't move that fast. Spinning blades won't become slower or less deadly because you saw someone throw at them. No, of course not. But that's what the reader will expect. Do they really? That's kind of a dumb reader, isn't it? If that's what the reader expects, it's like, yeah, if you see things that get slower because Matrix. That's not, no. No, what? This can be reversed. The reader will be genuinely shocked if the hero sees a stealthy attack coming and still falls foul of it. I mean, it depends on when you see it. If you see it like last moment, like somebody sneaks up on you with a dagger and you turn around, they already have the dagger raised. It's like, shit, guess I'll die. In that case, yeah, it can make sense. Like if they turn around and see the dagger as it falls, then yeah, I mean, it might be shocking, but you could draw it out into this, oh no, you know, when people sometimes, in fact, quite frequently, talk about how under extreme adrenaline, like in a life or death situation, everything seems to be slowing down. So I guess you could do that. Let's see. Fire Emblem Halberd beats all. Who beat Halberd? I mean, Halberd beats all in general, so we can just leave it at that. Pressure enhances skill. That's quite true. Now, there is in psychology, there's a concept of flow where you have exactly the right kind of challenge level that suits your skill perfectly, and you become fully immersed and engrossed in what you're doing, and you work at the highest possible efficiency. Now, if the challenge is overwhelming, on the other hand, that can kind of break you down. Like if the pressure becomes too much, then your brain just kind of shuts down. So it depends a little bit. But in general, yeah, I mean, when things matter, it also depends on the individual person, though. So you can definitely play off of character traits. Like one person may just freeze in shock and fear and just shut down completely. I can't do this. It's too much. Whereas somebody else will just completely, basically get into flow and activate all their resources that they have available. So you can do either, but this is a very common trope that, you know, the higher the stakes, the better somebody is. Where this really bothers me personally is when you have this movie trope where character gets shown a new skill. You know, like the character transformed into something. Spawn would be a good example of that horrible movie adaptation, which was just complete garbage. It's like he's just recently gotten the, I was going to say costume, but it's essentially a symbiote. and he's shown some basics, and then he becomes super proficient with using the chains in no time. And this is a very, very common thing in movies. Sometimes they give you an indication of a long stretch of time passing, but a lot of times it's just like, yeah, I'll show you the thing. You have a time frame, like there's this upcoming battle, or there's this whatever. Like, we know that time is limited, and the hero just learns something just like that. They go from complete noob to master swordsman in like a couple of days or something. That's just dumb, and that doesn't really have a lot of emotional impact. It's better to approach that in a different way. Like, say they learn the basics and then they push through with sheer determination. Like, in a fight they get injured a lot because they just don't have the kind of skill. But you shouldn't underestimate the importance of aggression. Like in martial arts and in any kind of combat situation, aggression is kind of underrated. If you have two people who are equally skilled or equally unskilled, and the one is vastly more aggressive than the other, they will probably take it. So things like that, or you have to play a little bit more with that beyond just, oh yeah, they received some training for 30 minutes. They are now masterful and everything. And if the pressure becomes great, then they will rise to the challenge, and the complete noob will become a master because he has to. No, get out of here. What would you say is the maximum width of a sword before it becomes a liability in terms of form? Did you expect me to come up with like this and this many centimeters and not a millimeter more? No, that's not quite how it works. I mean, I would say, let's say if it's like 2 hands wide, you've probably got a problem. Even if it's some kind of super material, like super light material, or if the blade is extremely thin or whatever, if you work around the problem of weight, if that's not an issue, if you have such a wide blade in front of you, it's not that easy to maneuver. It just becomes bulky. It gets to the point where you even obstruct your own view with it, and it becomes a bit much. So I'd say generally anything under 2 hands width. That depends on the size of the hands of the user, but that's fair because a larger framed user can get away with a larger sword. And now somebody is gonna point at some character who has like really short and skinny and has ginormous hands, and that would be a little different. But you get the gist, right? Kurgan sword versus Kurgan shield, which beat with. So the Kurgan shield is also the Lego type that you put together. I don't know. I mean, in either case, they would probably on impact break apart, and then you're left with nothing but the handle. What's more useful, a sword handle or a shield handle? I'd say the sword handle if it still retains the guard, but Shouldn't Captain America also carry a gun? I mean, he does sometimes. Anyway, stop sidetracking this. This is a particular topic. Take it seriously. No, that's fine. Anyway, so here's some notes about particular weapons and their characterization. Here, this is something I find funny. Swords, straight. Swords bring to mind knights and samurai. Straight. Samurai. And then it says here, serrated or curved blades tend to be perceived as a corruption of the sword's nobility, particularly despicable character. Samurai, curved blade, despicable, corrupted nobility. You see why I don't quite follow that, right? But I'm, of course, deliberately nitpicking now for funsies. Yeah, nobility, honor, straightforward, honesty. That depends. I mean, you can very much create a character that's all about honor that has a certain code of honor, but is not really a good guy. And this is, in my opinion, a lot more interesting than the stereotypical, I'm an ugly, brutish, dude with a serrated blade, like I'm an orc or whatever, and I'm just gonna kill things because I'm evil. It's not very interesting. If you have a knight who, like, does things like, for example, if part of their code is to, help those who are defenseless, whatever, the knight can do that, but can still be kind of a cunt in other ways. Like if the knight is also if part of the code is also, persecute evil wherever you find it. Sounds all good, but depends on what is that knight's definition of evil. If a heretic, for example, is considered evil, oh, how dare you have a different belief from me? I'm gonna put you up on the stake, or I'm just gonna kill you because you have a different belief. It's not exactly a good guy, is it? But according to that character's own code of honor, he's perfectly clear. I mean, there's also, for example, if you look at actual medieval Europe, where you had the division of the classes, those who work, those who fight, those who pray. Those who work, the knights and the nobility and everything, they were supposed to be good Christians, because they didn't want to end up in hell and all that. They didn't want to be damned in the afterlife. And unfortunately, killing other Christians, not quite okay, according to that. But they did that all the time. They went to war. They fought other Christians. And that's not really okay. So what did they do? They paid the clergy, those who pray, to pray for them to not go to hell because they sin. Is that, like, in the framework of the times, that was probably considered honorable. At least they didn't really have objection to that. To us nowadays, seems a little hypocritical, doesn't it? And, it means that honor doesn't mean ethical. And if normally when people think noble and honorable, they do think ethical as well, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. So that makes a character more interesting. And if you can... Anyway, this is more about the characters than about the weapons. But we can talk about that as well. Who cares? So the straight sword, in general, can be seen as honorable and whatever. But, it depends a little bit on exactly how it's portrayed. I mean, if it's a relatively finely shaped sword with like an elaborate guard and everything, decorated maybe, then it's got this more of the noble aspect to it. If it's just a pretty large, wide, straight blade with either no guard or very simple, and just kind of some crude wrap or something, you can definitely portray it in a way that makes it look a lot less heroic, for sure. But, that's the general conception of, the straight sword is honorable and everything. And whereas the curved blade is kind of stealthy rogue and whatever. This is a very Eurocentric view, of course. Curved swords. What do we have here? Messer is underrated compared to katana in fantasy. Yep, I mean, everything is underrated compared to the katana in fantasy and pop culture. The most effective weapon is the giant with a giant stone sling that shoots giant pommels at giant... Yeah. Okay, if a character has a powerful weapon but has no clue how to use it correctly, most of the story is... has no clue how to use it correctly, most of the story is that bad writing. Will readers be angry if most of the conflicts so far would have been no challenge at all? I mean, it depends on the character and how he interacts with everything. By the way, thanks for the donation, of course. I'll just stick mainly to the topic, but don't feel like I don't appreciate any contribution just because I don't say thanks every time. It's just I'm in the flow of talking. But I do appreciate it. Anyway, so it depends a little bit. I mean, what character is that? Where are they coming from? Is it just some regular person who this epic, magical, or whatever powerful weapon is thrust upon and they have to deal with it? Or is it somebody who could be expected to be able to use it, but just is kind of dumb about it? That is very dissatisfying. But if it's the struggle of the person who finds themselves in this situation which they're really not comfortable with and which is outside of their competence, but they try to learn to deal with it and get better with it and all that, and that can be quite interesting, in my opinion. Viking swords versus European swords differences. Viking swords are European. It's Northern Europe. Scandinavia is in Northern Europe. So I have no idea what you're asking there. If you mean later European, like late medieval swords, then the difference would be Viking swords generally are mostly for cutting. They don't have very pronounced points. You can thrust with them, but cutting is really the main purpose. And they have pretty minimal guard. It's pretty short, and large pommels. They got a lot smaller later. And stuff. Yeah, stuff. Okay, where are we here? In terms of modern weapons, handguns share much of the sword's characterization, especially revolvers. Yeah, I guess. There's something about revolvers well, I'm not sure I agree with that, actually, the more I think about it. Because you've got plenty of villains with revolvers, and I don't think firearms necessarily work along those lines of noble and honorable and everything. It's a good question. I don't think it's usually characterized the same way. Anyway. Yeah, serrated, that's very common. Like, if a sword is supposed to look evil, you put some serrations and spikes on it. That's so common. I don't know why evil fighters are supposed to be less effective. I mean, the thing is, spikes and stuff like that, they make sense on maces. If you've seen the recent video I did on redesigning Skyrim weapons, I didn't touch the mace and the hammer. Why? Because I feel like you can get away with a lot more in case of a mace and a hammer. A mace can have spikes and sharp corners and stuff like that because it's used in a different way. It's mostly blunt impact, and you're not trying to slice through something. You just bash it. It's a different kind of strike. And in that case, yeah, I mean, if you transfer the force onto smaller points that don't need to really penetrate, that in that case it's more that those points and corners grab onto the material that you're striking and make sure it really digs in and just transfers most of the force into the target. So you can get away with a lot more in that case. So if it's like a spiked mace or something, that's fine. Serrated blade on a sword, it's not terribly useful. I mean, there are almost none in history, really. At least in Europe, I can't even think of a single sword that was consistently serrated. I mean, there were a few like rare examples of, wavy edges, like flame blades. Pretty rare. Serrations, I mean, maybe they existed, but pretty rare. You see them sometimes in India, for example. I saw a few examples, but it's not common at all. It's because it's not that great for use. In America, guns are extremely symbolic. Revolvers are the katanas for us. You'll never see Clint Eastwood without one. Yeah. But, I mean, Clint Eastwood, or like the stereotypical gunslinger, I'm not sure that's much of a, like, honorable, straightforward, honest... Well, okay, straightforward, yes, but honorable, honest? I don't know. That's more along the lines of badass. They are quite often portrayed almost more as anti-heroes than heroes, because it's quite often, the gunslinger is pretty frequently somebody who has like an alcohol problem, or is really gruff and not a man of very words and very curt. And whereas a knight is more, eloquent and charismatic and all of that. It's a different trope, in my opinion. It's more about the roughness and gruffness and all of that. So to me, a gunslinger would be more like a mercenary in like a medieval or fantasy context. Like this, it's not really mercenary, not really honorable. I mean, some gunslingers, yeah, okay, fine. Depends, but anyway. Yeah, particularly despicable characters. Yeah, it's worth noting that these types of blades often originate from non-European cultures, and so some research should be done into individual examples as to not equate unfamiliarity with baseless evil. Yes, exactly. I mean, curved blades, there are some it also really depends on the time frame you look at. I mean, curved blades were standard in later times in Europe, 17th, 18th century. Curved, yeah, that was the way to go. That's what they used. Were they evil for using curved blades? No, not really. So yeah, it very much depends on the cultural context and the times. Now, of course, in fantasy, you don't have that. You don't have the cultural and time frame context. So in that case, I don't think straight and curved really matters so much as the shape of the guard and the handle and the color of the blade. Generally like a black blade is supposed to be evil and things like that. I think that goes more into it, and decorations versus extremely utilitarian stuff like that. Axes / hammer, strength. The axe or hammer is usually the province of a brute, though not necessarily one who's mean-hearted. Now, axes, yeah, you can make the claim, or hammers, you can make that claim. Axes, not so much, in my opinion. It really depends on the kind of axe. There are some pretty, elegantly curved axe blades and ornate axes and, fairly intricately shaped and axes with thin blades and all of that. Like the Dane axe, for example, to me is not a brutish weapon at all. And it wasn't really seen that way. The Dane axe had a certain prestige to it. So that's the general idea, but you can definitely deviate from that, in my opinion. You can very much have an axe as more of a more noble weapon. It's generally not considered a noble weapon, but you can come up with a design that makes it look a lot more appropriate for, a more noble character, whatever that means. And of course, the hammer is typical for paladins, which are supposed to be very noble and honorable and heroic and all that. So definitely depends. Shotguns, yeah, I can kind of see that. A shotgun loaded with a slug, yeah, kind of packs a hammer-like punch. Clubs are difficult to really portray as anything other than a crude, if not improvised weapon. This is a commoner's weapon, poor man's weapon, something hastily crafted, things like that. Clubs, yeah, definitely, sadistic warrior. I'm not so sure about the sadistic with regards to maces. I mean, if it's a spiked mace, yeah, okay, fine. You get something there. If it's a flanged mace, that's definitely more of a knightly weapon. And in history, it was exactly that. Knights used flanged maces, and there was nothing villainous about them. It was just a dedicated anti-armor weapon. But as I said, like a spiked mace, yeah, or spiked club in particular. Spiked mace can be a studded or spiked club, yeah. At the same time, the kanabo shows that even a studded club can be somewhat more refined looking. A samurai with a kanabo, you wouldn't think that's a villain necessarily. I mean, could be, but like it's not. It's still got the honorable part of it, just maybe more of a more forceful version of it. I don't know. Bows and larger throwing knives. Yeah, noble type of heroism. Can be, yeah, the Robin Hood kind of deal, Legolas. In history, depends very much on where you look. If you ask the French, then the longbow is the most despicable weapon of them all, because only coward, commoners use that, and they shouldn't be able to take down our noble knights. That was a big deal to them. Yeah, how can it be that this filthy common rabble can kill our knights with this dishonorable weapon? That's completely unacceptable. Like some people see firearms. In a world that has swords and everything, and then firearms start to appear. It can either be a fantasy world or can be, feudal Japan, when firearms appeared and they weren't, some people had problems with them, found them dishonorable. The bow can be the same way. Also, throwing knives. Any ranged weapon can have this sort of devious, roguish, villainous aspect as well. But it can be heroic as well. Just depends on how you portray it. Let's see. Yeah, closest relation is the sniper rifle. This actually shows the problem with that. A sniper isn't generally seen as an honorable character, right? A very effective one, but it's almost more. It can be an assassin, or it can be, kind of the battlefield rogue almost. Not necessarily heroic, unless they happen to shoot Hitler, and that's completely heroic. But I can see where they're coming from with axes and hammers. Big two-handed smashing weapons usually are assigned to brutish characters in fantasy. I'm probably thinking of large two-handed axes. Yeah, definitely. But again, it depends. I said that the Dane axe is a large two-handed axe, but it's nothing really brutish about it. And also, if you look at the poleaxe, it was used with a lot of finesse. It was definitely a technical weapon, if you look at the historical manuals. And a poleaxe, in fact, that's a good example, because a poleaxe is pretty much the definition of a knightly weapon. If you look, let's see, I'm just going to look it up here. Show you some pictures. Poleaxe. All right. So something like this was considered a knightly weapon. It was used by knights against other knights. Men-at-arms didn't have to be high nobility, didn't have to be knights as such, but it's generally, this was not a commoner's weapon. You can tell that by the manuals. And also with the way it looks, you can see it's somewhat more intricate. It's got the brutish aspect of the kind of meat hammer kind of thing going on, but then it's got the kind of somewhat decorated langets and the discard, and the axe blade is not necessarily brutish looking. So this is kind of in between. Like, you could portray this either way, but it was definitely seen as more of a noble weapon. Not as noble as a sword, maybe, but definitely not like a brutish weapon as such. Let's see. Small throwing knives, shuriken. Yeah, okay, that's basically associated with trickery and assassination, ninja, assassins, etc., all of that. Modern counterpart, Uzis? I don't know. I don't agree with that. I also don't agree with putting a chakram and a whip in the same category as small throwing knives and shuriken, things like that. Because a whip and chakram, and also the, it's kind of like the 9-section staff, no, not staff, 9-section whip, for example, in Chinese martial arts. That's really more of an exotic skill weapon. Like, it's one that requires a lot of skill and finesse. Throwing knives, shuriken, I mean, yeah, of course they require skill too, but they're really more associated with, yeah, underhanded tricks, the way it's said here as well. I would put blowguns in the same category as well. Stealth weapons that are often used to, well, either assassinate somebody who is unaware, or more likely in case of throwing weapons as a distraction, because they're not really lethal as such. It's not like a throwing spear. So you would throw something at somebody's face. Things like, well, the stereotypical pocket sand and stuff like that. That would also fall under this category. Caltrops, things like that. That's really more devious kind of distraction and either hit and run weapons, like for escape, like a smoke bomb, or just distraction and follow up. Whereas chakram, it's more along the lines of throwing axes, I would say. And a whip is, again, I mean, I would argue it's not really much of a weapon, unless it's a metal one. But it's more of a, I don't know, capture them and interrogate them kind of thing, I guess. I don't know. But like rapid fire, I don't really associate with that in the same way. I would equate this with, say, a pocket derringer, maybe. I think that would make more sense, like a small throwing weapon or something like that. So it's more like something that you suddenly whip out and that doesn't have a lot of firepower at all, but can be used to wound somebody, to prepare for a follow-up, to get away, or just use in like a desperate situation where you don't have anything else. The Liberator would, I guess, also fall in that category. Stuff like that. Let's see, I agree about pole axes, pole arms, weapons that I find are wielded by skilled specialists in the fantasy I read, yeah. Stick staves, nunchaku, billy clubs, skill. Well, yes, with staves, nunchakus, sticks, yeah, arguably. Billy clubs, wouldn't necessarily say that's more of a strength weapon in my opinion. Since these weapons appear innocent, they often indicate a hidden or rarely used degree of skill. Yeah, makes sense. I mean, the quarterstaff can just look like a walking stick. That's, you don't really see it as a weapon for the most part, unless it's iron shod. That's more of an indicator that you can definitely turn a staff into something that looks more like a weapon if it's studded or has iron tips or spikes or things like that. You can definitely make that look more. Or if it's an all metal staff, that could also work. And chacos, I don't think they're generally considered innocent looking. I think that's more something that is more obvious. Unless Jackie Chan goes, picks them up and tries to use them as chopsticks to pretend that they are not weapons. That's a bit hard to sell. But yeah, definitely a skill weapon. Aside from the billy clubs, I do think that's more of a strength thing. Now these can also be categorized somewhat or characterized differently. It can either be a commoner's weapon, like it can be a hidden, like an agent, assassin, ninja, that sort of thing, who just uses that weapon as part of their disguise. It can be just a weapon of a, wandering martial artist. It can be the weapon of a commoner who can't afford anything else, but still somehow manage to get formal training. I mean, you can. There are situations in which that could happen. So somebody who is skilled but is not very high on the social ladder, so to speak. But you could also turn that into a more prestigious weapon if it's, studded with precious metals or rare metals, like a mithril staff or who knows what. Something like that could work. And yeah, a wizard staff is definitely more of a prestigious kind of weapon. Knives and poisoned weapons. Yeah, I mean, sure, that's definitely stealth and dishonor and all of that. So knives depends. I mean, you can definitely portray them in a different way as well. Like if, Crocodile Dundee with his buoy has a bit of a different sort of appearance than a dual knife dual wielding assassin or something. Martial arts, so unarmed. Yeah, not much to say here. Yeah, can be either calm and controlled martial artist or a hot-headed practitioner, like a brawler kind of deal. Fists, knuckle dusters, claws. Yeah, those who brawl rather than mastering a fighting style, it can be, but this can definitely be a case of a highly skilled martial artist using that, or, I mean, even a brawler can be highly skilled. If it's a bare knuckle boxing champ, or a street fighter can also be very skilled. It's not, I mean, generally with street fighting is associated with dirty tricks and all that, but it can still involve a lot of skill. So in that case, in claws definitely can be very much on the skill end of things. If you think of Vega in Street Fighter, that's definitely all skill and fancy stuff. So claws can very much be a skill weapon. They could also potentially be a stealth weapon. Knuckle dusters, fist weapons can very much be stealth weapons. Like something that you conceal in your fist and, makes it much more deadly than just a punch. What's typically called a billy club is a tonfa that police use. Okay, yeah. If it's a tonfa rather than a truncheon, then I can see that. Yeah, a tonfa is more of a skill weapon. I would agree with that. As long as it's not just a club, like a baton, that would be more of a strength thing. Although, again, it can be used with skill as well. I mean, Nightwing is a good example of a baton user who is super high in skill and doesn't go about it with just brute strength. Crossbows and wands. Okay. Strange personalities and mark the point at which people perceive weapon design to move past what's obvious to the layman. Huh? Okay, that's a small device which smart people can use to great effect. Not really. I mean, okay, if you have a very compact like pistol, crossbow, yeah, fine. That's a small device. But if you think of, a heavy crossbow that's cranked with a windlass, then that's really not so much an intellect weapon. I mean, the crossbow again was more of a commoner's kind of thing. Definitely not a noble weapon, not really associated with... I think this comes from the fact that crossbows are more complex devices than just a bow. They're more difficult to make. Not that, making a bow is easy by any means. It requires a lot of skill and knowledge and everything, but like, you can make a shoddy bow pretty easily. A shoddy crossbow is a bit harder and less useful, arguably. So, I mean, if it's some kind of, clockwork crossbow, that's like a super complex, intricate design, then yeah, I can see that. But even then, I mean, unless it it's extremely complicated to operate. It requires a lot of intelligence to make it, not necessarily to use it. Equivalent to lasers and electrical weapons. Maybe. I don't know. What would fall under that category, though? If I think about historical weapons that require a lot of intelligence, I mean, some firearms, maybe. Siege engines, but they don't really fall in that category of standard weapons that like individual characters would carry. That would be a little difficult. So I can definitely see where they're coming from with this. It makes some sense. I mean, all of this entire thing, the reason why I picked it is that it's pretty well written overall. Like I may disagree and nitpick with a few things, but overall it's quite a good article. So it's definitely well thought out in general. Scythes are poor weapons in real life. Ooh, somebody understands. Now, depends if it's they're Worth scythes that look quite a bit different. It's just a less strongly curved blade at a different angle, and it's a different pole that it's attached to. If you look at a standard scythe as a farming implement, the blade is too thin and the handle is shaped in such a way that it's ideal to cut something at ankle height. Unless you want to make a fighting style out of that. It's like, yeah, I'm going to cut your feet off. It's not going to work too well. So that like a standard agricultural scythe would be a terrible weapon. You could modify it. In fact, I may or may not have a project going that involves something like that I'll be able to test, but okay. Tend to be used by antagonists and suggest a high level of skill. I mean, yeah, fair enough. Pole arms. The thing is this, with pole arms can be used with comparatively low skill, especially something like a spear, a lot of other pole arms as well. You know, if you reduce it to the most basic level, they can be used with minimal skill, and they can still be effective because of the reach and power and everything. If you just use them with brute strength, then yeah, you're still going to be reasonably effective against somebody who doesn't have a polearm. But they can also be used with a lot of skill. So yeah, can't really argue with that. Shield strength. Reasonable. Yeah, reasonable. If we're talking... Well, it depends. Like I always say, it depends. If you're looking at a large strapped shield or a shield that would normally be used in formation, like a Roman scutum, definitely strength, because those are heavy. And you don't move them around that much. They are mainly used for kind of passive body protection. If you think like a Viking round shield or a Rotella, the Renaissance all-metal shield, that's definitely more of a skill thing. And if you look at bucklers, of course, that's all skill, like nothing but essentially. Like sword and buckler is highly technical, a very skilled kind of thing. Shields see an almost baffling underuse in fantasy narratives. I can't agree with that. I think the shield is ubiquitous in fantasy. It's very common, in my opinion. I mean, to be fair, if you look at Lord of the Rings, for example, who has a shield? Any of the main characters ever use a shield? Not that I can think. They all use two-handed weapons. Or just a single-handed sword without a shield. So, yeah, I mean, I can see it in some ways. Spears, tridents, flails, strength. Flail. Yeah, maybe. I wouldn't put flails and spears and tridents in the same category at all. They are completely different weapons. I don't think you can put them in the same category whatsoever. A spear is, again, same thing as with a polearm, applies even more so. The spear can be extremely easy to use. Like you can use it with basically no skill. Just poke them, essentially. So it can be super easy, but it can also be extremely advanced in skill and very technical. So it's a cool idea. A modern wizard that uses the collapsible baton as a wand. That's interesting. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Oh, let's see. The most honorable weapon: claws and buckler. I mean, yeah, I can kind of see it. If you have a buckler covering your hand and then claws sticking out, I wouldn't call it honorable, but I mean, you could portray it that way. This kind of character who goes, let's do fisticuffs. Like the character who just struts in and just, oh, you have a longer weapon? I don't give a shit. And just, let's go right in. That's, balls deep. That's more of a kind of reckless or like brave character to the point of reckless and no idea of self-preservation, that sort of thing. Yeah. Anyway. Tridents, arrogant, overbearing weapon. Yeah, that's how they often appear. Fair enough. Can also be, gladiator's weapon. I mean, that's what they were originally. Then again, a gladiator can be perfectly arrogant and, kind of an attention whore, I suppose. Animal. Yeah, I guess that can be a weapon. There was one other thing here that I wanted to... Power has a cost. Yeah, that's a really good concept. I like that. Wait. Roland Deschain's revolvers? A cost? I mean, yeah, okay, if it includes how you come by the weapon, yeah, I can see that, but it's not like him using them costs him anything at that time. But yeah, the kind of weapon that takes away something from the character. Sometimes you have fantasy weapons that drain the user's life force or part of the soul or something, or they have some kind of potentially catastrophic long-term effect. If we count powers, magical powers as a weapon, I guess then Raven would be a good example from DC. This kind of, if like you have tremendous power, but if you use it, there is a chance that all hell breaks loose. That sort of thing. That can be very interesting. The kind of thing that makes heroes unwilling to use the weapon or the power that they have. That can be, I mean, it's been done a lot, but it can still be an interesting device for storytelling, for sure. Let me see. Yeah, sometimes they come by those weapons through great personal loss. So that can be another thing that makes it, that gives the weapon more emotional impact, if you will. Simplicity. Yeah, this is an excellent point. The reader has to understand what it can do. This is very important, because otherwise you get this lazy deus ex machina all over the place, where it's like, oh, this weapon or this character has powers. It's magic. It can be anything, right? Because magic. That's really dumb. I don't like that, because then the stakes aren't as high. You don't know what to expect. The emotional impact of something being used isn't as great. That sort of thing. Because it's just like, oh, they can do that? Oh, I didn't know. Oh, okay, what's next now? You're gonna draw a magic fucking bunny that gnaws the faces off your enemies? Is that what we're doing now? It's not very good. So definitely is important to explain. This is what I like about Brandon Sanderson's writing, for example, where he actually sets up this magical system that has rules. There's a consistent logic that pervades all of this. It's like, okay, this is how they use magic. They need to do this. They need to, burn metals or whatever. There's a certain thing that they've got to do, and there are certain effects that they can create. And then the interesting thing becomes, how do they use this? Like, they can use the effect in novel ways. And that makes it really interesting. It's like, what's a good example on top of my head? I don't know. I can't really think of too much on top of my head, but essentially a kind of ability that is used in a way that you don't normally expect. Like, say a character can jump really high, with, jumping boots or who knows what. And then they use that in a situation where, say, they are trapped in a room with the ceiling coming down on them. And the hero notices that the floor is somewhat porous and it's not that strong. It just kind of tries to stomp away at it, but notice it's still a bit too strong. And then the ceiling comes down, and at the point where the ceiling contacts the character's back and they start to bend over, they're like, holy shit, I have the jumping boots. And they activate that, and because the ceiling is too solid, they can't jump up, so all the force goes downward, and they break the floor and push it away. That would be cool. Stuff like that. Like, okay, you can do that. Yeah. This sort of thing. That would be really awesome. And that's a good way to do that. Let's see. There was another point here. Here, this. I kind of skipped this. A hero cannot simply happen across the greatest sword in the world. They have to earn it. This is, like, one good example is in The Hobbit. The way Glamdring and Sting are found. It's like Gandalf just rummages through the trash of some trolls in the middle of nowhere, like randomly. Oh, there's a troll cave. They have a bunch of trash. They're messies, essentially. And, what's this? Oh, there's a thing there. They're in the trash. Oh, it's this famous sword with magic powers. And it's like, okay, so this legendary sword that this character has, how did he come upon it? Oh, he found it in a troll trash heap. What? That's it? It's not very satisfying. Also, Conan. And in the movie, the first Conan movie, the way he finds his swords, like, he's running away from wild dogs or wolves or whatever it was, and stumbles in this, this grave of a king. It's like, oh, there's a sword. Okay. I mean, the way they did it was actually pretty decent. It was still satisfying. So it was reasonably well done, but it was still like, how did this character come upon his famous sword? Oh, he found it. It was just lying there. Just, oh, look, somebody dropped some shit. I'm gonna pick it up. Not as satisfying, right? Anyway, so yeah, we're at the end of this article here. Yeah, exactly. Here, this. I actually want to end with this. In fantasy fiction, readers want to believe in a consistent fictional logic. I cannot stress this enough. Every time I talk about fantasy stuff and realism and everything, some people get butthurt because it's just fantasy. But this is the thing. There's good fantasy and there's bad fantasy. The bad fantasy is just, it magic. It be magic character can do what need. It's not very satisfying, is it? Whereas if you actually build up a system that makes sense in and of itself, even if there's magic, there can still be logic, right? And as human beings, we were kind of looking for logic. So, okay, sometimes we just want to turn our brains off and watch stuff like, From Dusk Till Dawn, say, where it's just the whole thing is so over the top and ridiculous that it doesn't matter. You don't need logic and whatever. But if you want to build a persistent fantasy world that you can come back to, that has different characters and has multiple stories in it, this is what you want. You want an internal system, you want logic, you want the reader to understand what's going on. So, if you can come up with a good explanation for why this character has a giant sword, then that's much more satisfying than, oh, he enhanced, like Cloud. Oh, he Mako enhanced. He can do that. Can we get a little more than that? It's like this character, like Angry Clown here, for example, in the super chats. Is one of my patrons. We've talked about a few things. He made a character who is particularly strong, but is also substantially heavier than normal. He has heavier bones and sturdier tendons and all of that denser muscle, that sort of thing. That makes sense. Now, the character is not just stronger, but also heavier and can actually withstand the kind of force that he generates. He stays on his feet, and everything is much denser than a regular person, as opposed to skinny little emo Cloud running around with, hey, I have a giant sword. He doesn't look like he's able to handle that. I'm talking unreasonable amounts of shit about Cloud because I very much enjoyed Final Fantasy VII, but there's that. Okay, so why are tridents not known as war weapons? Well, there are some things that are kind of trident-like, like the let me see here. Yeah, this is essentially a trident, kind of. In fact, this is probably a better example. So there are some historical weapons that were used on the battlefield that are kind of tridents, and here you've got this Italian, you've got some Chinese and Japanese weapons that are along those lines as well. So yeah, it exists. It does exist, actually, or did. A modern wizard could use a length of chain instead of a staff or wand, like in the Dresden Files. Haven't seen that. Could potentially double as a magic circle. Yeah, I mean, it could be something that, like, if the chain can be, if you've got like a Viagra spell that stiffens the entire chain, makes it very hard, and you can strike somebody with, or a rope or whatever, and can maybe, make it denser and harder and heavier, and you can use that as a weapon. That could totally work. And when not in use, the character could use it as a belt. Or, their belt can be the magical weapon. Just, can you imagine like this gruff-looking mage, like, yeah, I've had enough of this. You're going to get your medicine now. And he takes off his belt. He's like, what the fuck? And he whips it, and then it elongates and stiffens and hard. Okay, yeah. I know where we're going here. But, or it can turn into like a sharp whip or something, That would be kind of cool. Like he takes off his belt and everybody's like, what are you doing? And he turns it into a staff. Or a sword, for that matter. There are some belt swords, actually. Super curious about your opinions on 40k war gear. Because power swords are pretty much lightsabers. You can adjust the power field on. So you can half-sword it? What? On the other hand, chain swords. I've talked so much about chain swords, like almost in every single live video I've made. So I think we're good there. We can just revisit some of the live videos I've done. I've talked about it. 40k war gear, is that a particular... Well, it depends. I don't generally like the aesthetic. Okay, I will say the Ghost Axe looks pretty awesome. That's actually pretty cool. Kind of badass. It would be nice if that's... Oh, sorry. I forgot that the window wasn't visible. The Ghost Axe. So the spike that's pointing in that direction, it wouldn't actually do anything, but at least it looks kind of cool. The thing is, I don't really know enough about 40k. I know nothing about 40k, essentially. Yeah, heresy, I know. So, I don't feel like it makes much sense for me to talk about it. All I can say is most of the weapons look ridiculous, just in terms of how over the top they are, and just aesthetics not really my thing. So, but I said I don't really want to talk too much about something that I have no clue about. Because if I criticize something, and somebody's going to be like, yeah, but, you know, then there's going to be the nerd squad like, no, they have these special effects and stuff, you do nothing. It's like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. I had an idea for a sacred sword that serves a rechargeable magic energy battery. Okay. It would take mental and physical training to convert the energy for different spells and bluffs. Bluffs? Oh, buffs probably. But it pays off big. Okay. Yeah, that could work. That could work. So, how do you charge it? Like, do you stick it in some bastard and it just drains them? Just that would be kind of neat, I guess. I mean, it would be interesting. Like, imagine you have a character who's not evil, but who has this kind of weapon that like draws the life energy from somebody and converts that into magical power, and that he can use for, or he or she or whatever can use for different effects. And then it's like, if as long as they have enough enemies, it works fine. But let's say they're in a situation where the thing is empty and there's suddenly like a monster is attacking, a giant monster is attacking the town, and they're like, oh shit, I have to drain somebody. And it will be this moral dilemma of, what do I do now? You know, it could be interesting. When dealing with magic, I think there should be consistency too. Just as the laws of physics, there should be laws governing the magic of your world too, and clearly defined for the reader. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The laws of magic. I mean, there is generally, you in a fantasy setting, you become a mage by studying magic, right? And sometimes it takes certain gestures or incantations, or, you know, even if it's just mental focus to concentrate them, whatever. They study the principles of magic. So that in and of itself tells you there are principles and rules of magic. So, right? Shouldn't be all over the place. 40k power weapons are wrapped in energy fields you can toggle or adjust instead of being pure energy. I've never seen that anywhere else. Okay. I can see that working. If it's like some kind of force field. Like you can basically... you could even have a magical weapon that is essentially invisible because it is just a magical field of energy or force field or who knows what, that you can change the shape of, that can kind of attract materials and shape them into a certain form and compress them into a weapon, stuff like that. That could definitely work. Like you could have like the shape, this energy field in the shape of an axe or a hammer or whatever, and you dump a box of nails on it and just kind of fuses into the shape of the weapon, you know? That could be interesting. Anyway, we're at over an hour, so I think I'll wrap it up here. Just wanted to make this not too terribly long. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again, everybody, for the super chats. Always appreciated. And I hope you got something out of this. I hope you found this entertaining. Maybe it gave you some ideas for writing stories or whatever. And yeah, I also hope you're having a great weekend. Thanks for watching, and I will see you around. Have a good one.